Welcome, Susan.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Ken.
Okay, well, my 22 years has been, that's my corporate America experience. I started at Bank of America in 1995, right into an audit role, if you will, an IT audit role. Moved into security roles pretty quickly. And throughout my career, I started, totally aging myself, with mainframe security controls, right? Those were the days of mainframe on an SNA contained network, and I watched this space grow from mainframe to IP enabled to internet. Wow, that was a big concept way back when, right? At the bank, we had to actually request access to the internet back then. It was a big deal if you actually had access. Then we moved into client-server applications, right? Then we moving out to third-party service providers, starting to worry about whether they were going to protect our data, all the way into our cloud environments now. Everybody's moving to the cloud, so it's not, businesses aren't contained in their technology anymore. They're not contained in their security controls anymore. And I was lucky enough to watch a lot of that unfold. I remember being at the bank and hosting the first PIN security audit by Visa, right? This was before the days where we had all the breaches and credit card breaches, and I was like, man, these are really tight controls. We had good controls in place. Encryption keys, separated, all of the right controls. But then I remember thinking some short time later, maybe a couple of years later, we were implementing these merchant machines in the retail organizations, that all of a sudden all those controls that we put around credit cards and pins and encryption gone with a swipe. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my God, this is really bad. And then we start to hear 2004, the next place that I worked, BJ's Wholesale. I started there right after they announced a breach. Right, and from then, thanks to SB 1386 in California that came out, I think, in 2003, we now have really good visibility across our industry in terms of what's happening, who's been breached, and it's been a really wild ride for the last 22 years, and I can't really imagine doing anything else because it changes almost daily. So I've been around the block a few times in the security and risk space. But I'm going to keep it fairly general today, but I'll allow some opportunity to ask questions, obviously. We'll talk a little bit about the threat landscape. I'm going to talk about maybe what a good cybersecurity program would look like and how it would become a differentiator for businesses. It is a differentiator for a business today. As you can see, we've had a lot of activity in 2016 with regard to breaches, and it's clear we cannot escape the grid. If we think about all of these types of businesses, they all have different goals. Their goals for business are different, and their threats and exposures are different. So we're talking about three key tenets of cybersecurity. Confidentiality, right? That's very key in the healthcare environment. Integrity in your business environment. Government and infrastructure. Availability. Confidentiality, integrity, and availability are really tenets that we put controls around in the cybersecurity space. It's not just protection of data. I'm just going to touch upon a couple of these. Yahoo, 1 billion credentials exposed. Those are the type, they're looking for credentials in the social media space. They're looking for credit card, PII, and the retail space. In the energy space, government infrastructure, they're looking to take infrastructure down, right? DIN or DINE, I don't even know how to pronounce that. Earlier, I think that was actually, it's either late last year or early this year. They are one of the internet infrastructure providers that does DNS naming for Twitter, for New York Times, a couple other big names, and they were brought to their knees by a denial of service attack, and not easy to recover from them. So availability is really key, and part of the cybersecurity strategy actually now includes resiliency and recovery. So we have to really expand our reach. SWIFT, another interesting one, $89 million heist at the end of last year from the Bank of Bangladesh, out of the Bank of Bangladesh from some perpetrators who were able to infiltrate the SWIFT network. SWIFT is the network that translates financial messages across our financial institutions around the world. So if you want to move money, it probably is going through SWIFT. And those types of attacks have continued, not to that loss extent, but there's been an awful lot of activity in the industry just looking at what happened there. Do financial institutions have to beef up their controls around SWIFT? And the answer is probably yes. And SWIFT itself has kind of taken a step back, put out significant amounts of patches and those types of things to help secure their systems a little bit more. Couple that aren't on here that I'll just mention in terms of different types of exposures. In the energy space, early, I think it was in May of last year, and there have been more since, but a energy company in Michigan, same thing, denial of service attack. And these attacks, this one was ransomware, the latest in malware that has been plaguing all industries today. Energy company was taken down for a good portion of a day because of a ransomware attack. If you think about the proliferation of that type of attack, right, what could that type of attack do to the rest of our infrastructure, our financial infrastructure, our transportation, our energy, communications, right? So it's clearly not just in terms of protecting data. Those types of attacks could potentially take down infrastructure. And that's some of the things that our government's concerned about, and clearly our major industries are concerned about that as well. One other one that I'll just talk about, and this relates to transportation. This is a planned exercise. Two gentlemen did an exercise with a Jeep, and they were able to use the remote access capabilities for diagnostics in this Jeep, and they took out the transmission on a highway. At that time, there was about 500,000 vehicles on the road that had that same type of vulnerability. So you can see what that would do to our transportation systems if those types of vulnerabilities were leveraged. So it's pretty scary stuff. And traffic jams, I'm from the Boston area, traffic jams are bad enough already. As you can probably tell from my accent, I'm not from here, but I certainly don't want to see that proliferate. So those are some of the forces shaping us. A little bit about the threat landscape in terms of the actors. We call them the threat actors. You know, obviously, criminals is the big one. They want money, right? They have generally financial gain is the motivation. Extortion, like we talked about with the ransomware, is very, very big, and that's expected to continue in a pretty big way. Typically, if you're not already aware of it, typically distributed by email, lots of email attachments having this type of malware. And what we used to consider adequate in terms of protections no longer does it, right? When I started in this industry way back when, we had antivirus, right? Then we had antivirus and firewalls. Then we added intrusion detection. Then we added some heuristic capabilities. Now we've added some advanced threat protection capabilities. So it's a whole suite of controls to find evidence of an infection, right, that might not be really clear. So it's really hard now to detect those types of attacks, but they are planning to continue them and continue to extort our businesses and our personal friends and family. We sometimes get an inquiry from a friend. What do I do? I just got hit with ransomware. And we tell them if you didn't back up your data, just either pay or wipe your machine and start all over again, because there really isn't anything we can do to help them with that. Insiders is another type of threat actor. Sometimes the same motivation as criminals, right? We have plenty of criminals can be insiders. We add on a couple of little nuances to that. The motivation is sometimes personal advantage. Sometimes it's revenge. Sometimes it's, you know, operational disruption. It could be most anything. Somebody has financial issues and has access to information that would give them an advantage or give them some financial gain. Sometimes it's desperate situations. And sometimes it's by accident, which is the reason why we really pay attention to folks who have privileged access, who can move money, who can manage systems, pay a lot of attention, and we do a lot of monitoring for those types of individuals. Hacktivists. You wouldn't think that Fidelity might be subject to hacktivists, but if you think about it, we invest in a lot of different companies. We are worried about hacktivists. We may be investing in something that somebody doesn't believe in. So we're watching that on a continual basis. And the hacktivists' goals now aren't necessarily just disruption. They're looking to destroy their targets. So the stakes are higher than ever in the hacktivist space. Nation states, need I mention, you've probably read the news lately about some nation state potential activity there. Intellectual property, economic gain, that's going to be a continued concern around the world. Our government has indicated that they think that cyber issues are probably going to be as key to consider as nuclear threats were in the 50s, and it can be that dangerous to our infrastructure and to us. So that's kind of some of the threats and actors that shape our programs. So just thinking about, I'm just going to put all of these up. We're lucky, as I said, with 1386 to be able to have all of this visibility around breaches today. I used to count the number of states that had breach notification laws. Now I count the number that don't. I think there's only 4 that don't today. There's New Mexico, Kentucky, South Dakota, and Alabama, the only 4 states that don't have a breach notification law today. And difficult to manage when they're all different, but something that we continue to do. Just a couple of notes on this one. I won't spend a ton of time on this. You know, reputational risk is really important. For us in the financial services space, we don't ever want to lose customers because we weren't protecting their data. Once you leave a financial institution, you're probably unlikely to come back. But I wonder a little bit if we're becoming a little complacent or hardened in a way. How many of you have had a credit card replaced? Not really sure why, but you just got a new one in the mail, right? Issues there. How many have been subject to identity theft? Anybody? Yep. Hard to manage through that. A lot of the places that we still shop at have been breached. Anybody go to Home Depot recently? Or Target? Right? We still go. Even though they've been breached. I think they probably had a huge cost to pay initially, but it didn't necessarily bring their business down. So I worry that we're a little bit complacent in a way. So let's think about cybersecurity as a strategy. It's not an afterthought. Can't be an afterthought. Today, cybersecurity is expected to be on the agendas of the boards, company boards, and it is to a large extent. You know, you just mentioned companies are asking if you're secure when they want to do business with you. The boards it has to start there with a strategy. A risk-based approach is really the best way to go about it. As we talked about on the previous couple of slides, threats vary. They vary according to industry, they vary according to business type, but they're all vulnerable in some way. And the key for any business is to understand what the crown jewels are. What are the crown jewels of the business that really need to be protected? Is it your product? Is it your intellectual capital? Is it the identities that you have of all of the folks that you service, right? At college, you have lots of identities that need to be protected. In the financial services, we're protecting people's identity and their funds. So knowing the crown jewels and knowing the risks around those crown jewels are really key to putting any strategy in place. The technology advances, and so do the threats, right? It is becoming far more difficult. I talked about just in my 22 years, you know, and I didn't grow up a technologist, so those of you who are technologists have seen this, this exponential growth probably in a lot different and more meaningful way than I have, but I just think about, you know, I think about that DIN attack that was primarily perpetrated by Internet of Things devices, right? Using routers in homes, there's going to be about 20, I think Gartner predicted 22, 23 billion devices by 2020 will be out there. You know, I was listening to the news, there's a crock pot on the market that's internet enabled, right? Mostly anything could be internet enabled today. And so that's something that is not going to go away, and very, very hard to contain those threats. So the business needs to understand where their technology is headed, what technology and threats could impact them as well. So compliance and regulatory. You know, we like to say that compliance isn't security and compliance doesn't make you secure, but it has a really important place in an organization, because a firm needs to demonstrate that they've got good controls in place. They need to demonstrate that they've got a cybersecurity strategy. And it's something that clients ask about. Clients ask, are you ISO 27000 compliant? How are you complying with SEC regulations and Gramm-Leach-Bliley? And if you can't articulate it, that throws some doubt into people's minds. It also provides for a basic framework for a program. So if you're thinking about how cybersecurity is in the fabric of an organization, a good industry standard can help to do that. An ISO 27000, some organizations subscribe to NIST, some organizations subscribe to other types of controls, frameworks, and it's a good way to be able to articulate how you comply. And obviously, fines if you don't comply, particularly think about those, you know, states that have breach notification laws, right? You have to comply or you're going to be fined. SEC and other regulations have cybersecurity implications now, and you will be fined. The SEC is looking really hard now. The examination programs used to be just around other compliance area. In the broker-dealer space, it was around supervisory and insider trading. And now part of their exam is actually related to cybersecurity. So when that first started happening, we had to scramble and get the right folks together. We had a good program, but we walked away from that, you know, exhausted, because we had to articulate really well what our positions were. And so if it's part of the fabric of the organization and is easily demonstrated, it makes compliance so much easier. And to make it consumable and scalable, right? I said that clients are asking. If you can articulate your strategy, you can articulate key controls, you can articulate how you're considering the security of their crown jewels, of the security of the availability of the systems, the availability of their services. If you can articulate it well, it can actually be a tipping point with a client choosing you or not choosing you. And that's starting to become more and more prevalent. And it has to be consumable, right? It has to be said in a way that a non-security expert can understand, right? Okay. I'm going to talk just a little bit more about being a differentiator. Integral to the planning, the funding, and the overall strategy, testing of systems, right, has to include security testing now. I already said clients expect their data. And it's not just about technology. It is important, right? I talked about some of the layers of controls that we have in place today. But a whole different angle of cybersecurity has to be in the people space, right? The organization has to buy it. They have to be drinking from the same fountain in terms of cybersecurity awareness. Everybody from the help desk down to the folks that are doing the hands to the keyboard servicing customers, down to the janitors who are walking around who might see confidential information sitting on somebody's desk. The awareness has to be from top to bottom. And when somebody walks in to assess or have a conversation with somebody in your organization, everybody should have a couple of lines that they can talk about, right? Fidelity, we know we secure information really well, and I don't think there's any employee that's not going to have a thing or two that they could say about it. The workforce in the cybersecurity space also makes a difference. We've got a huge cybersecurity staff, but other organizations do not. An organization may be very small in terms of IT staff, right? Wear multiple hats, but knowing what you don't know is really important, and knowing what you can't do is really important. Right? Maybe you can't reverse engineer malware, but you should have controls in place, or a company that can help you during an incident to help you figure out what happened. You don't necessarily have to do penetration testing, right? You don't necessarily have to have that staff, but if you're internet facing, you're probably going to consider having penetration tests on a periodic basis. So. Knowing what you don't know is important, but the people and processes need to be diverse as well. I didn't grow up a technology person. I grew up a controls. My major was accounting, right? And I landed in an audit role that led to an IT audit role that led to a security role. And I've had, and I got into management my admin rights were taken away very early on. So let's just say I went down the management track, and my team actually took my admin rights away. They said, "You're management now. You don't need this kind of access." So kudos to them, but my technical track kind of diminished from there on. But you need good managers who will be able to put teams together around cybersecurity. You need legal folks. You need policy folks. You need financial folks. Right? When you're looking at risk to an organization, it is a security risk, perhaps, but the business is what's impacted. And the business needs to make a decision from a financial perspective. Are we going to fund that mitigation, or is the mitigation too expensive that we're just going to accept the risk? And those are decisions that are made all the time. And as a differentiator, right, those are really good risk conversations to have. Because if you go overboard on the technology and security spend, you might be missing something on the product end, delivering new products and services, right? So those conversations are extremely important, but need to be had. I would say that I think cybersecurity can actually be an enabler, right? And it's probably an overused term, but that's how we have to think of ourselves. We're not trying to shut the doors. We're not trying to keep everybody out, keep them from doing their jobs. But the way we look at it is when we're implementing new services, implementing new products, we're looking at cybersecurity right up front. So as we're looking at what's the functionality of this product or service, we're also looking at, and how do we secure it, right? Typically, and this will probably never end, new technologies are introduced to the market, the security team scrambles to try and understand it and figure out how to secure it, right? that's never going to end. So we'll continue to do that. But to the extent that cybersecurity can be considered in an organization as products and technologies are rolling out before it's implemented, there's a lot better chance of helping it to be more successful. Okay, let's talk a little bit about job openings in cybersecurity. It's complex and it's growing, right? There's no question about that. We talked about the occurrence of breaches. We talked about the technology advances. We talked about the IoT devices, right? And the complexity and the proliferation of our actors is just going to increase. It's not a bad field to be in right now. that I can pretty much guarantee. I said, 22 years, it's never been dull. And like I said, multitude of disciplines are required here. I would advocate for certifications. I think they do provide a base level of information. CISSP is a good one. There's also a cloud certification out there now as well. I mean, we're retraining our folks now just in terms of cloud technologies, and where we were really expert in our own infrastructure and networks. Now we really need to become expert in AWS and how we're securing that. Now we really need to become expert in Microsoft Azure, right? And not that we've gone that way in a big way, but the skills and ability to keep relevant is really key. The managed security service provider business, by the way, is also growing. That's going to more than double between now and 2020. I think that was a stat from Gartner as well. So, as well as organizations hiring staff to perform cybersecurity functions, there are businesses spinning up or increasing in a fairly big way that provide security services to companies, and something else to keep in mind there. Okay, I'm just going to give you all, getting credit for this course, getting credit for this talk. I wish I could say I was going to give you extra credit for asking questions, but I can't make that happen for you. But I can give you just a couple of things, tips for success if you want to go down this path. Opportunistic and persistence, right? This is motherhood and apple pie stuff, but the internships that you do, the courses that you take, they can be applied, right? Business courses, we're going to be making risk decisions that affect the business. Technology courses, the cybersecurity is integral to technology in general. Like I said, you don't have to have extensive experience in penetration testing and some of the more technical malware analysis type events. Consider your brand, right? Consider your own security, your own digital identity, your own Facebook identity, right? How do you want to be perceived? Think about that. Think about how much information you have about yourself on the internet. When recruiters are out there, we do that now, don't we? We look at Facebook and we check to see. It will help you to do that. Develop your expertise, right? Take the hard course. Go for that certification. Stay relevant. I mentioned Amazon Web. I mean, your organizations may use different technologies, and Google hosting, whatever it is out there that interests you. Stay relevant with the current technologies and current security techniques, at least, because it changes so fast. I have found through my 22 years. I have not been able to keep up as I would love to be able to keep up, right? I finally got an Amazon account so I could play, right? And but if I want to stay in this space, I'm going to have to remain relevant. I need to understand what ransomware could do to us, and even if I'm not looking at the code, I need to understand where are the threats in our organization, how are we protecting ourselves, how we do phishing campaigns, right? That's something that requires communications and business skills, not cyber skills, but we want to test people to see if they're actually catching that malicious attachment. So stay relevant and develop expertise in what you want. And then, you know, have a little discipline. My daughter's college age, and I talk to her about this all the time. You don't have to complete the degree and then start the program. Take a baby step. You know, baby steps are okay. Leaps are great, but inaction is not excusable, right? You take the couple of steps that are going to get you down the path, whether it's cybersecurity or something else, don't give yourself any excuses. So I think that's about the end of what I had to talk about today. In terms of differentiation, I think you can see that a business cannot not consider cybersecurity, cannot not think about it as being important, and it has to be from the top of the house down to the individual sitting at a desk. And talked about some of the controls, talked about some of the philosophies, and I hope it was useful to you. So. Questions?
I don't think I get extra credit, though. Thanks, Susan. That was great. First of all, I don't think SNA, Token Ring, and mainframes are that long ago to me. So those guys.
For some of us, they're not long ago.
What are those terminologies? A lot of progress has obviously been made in kind of the back office and networks, and even though you mentioned AWS, I heard S3 had an outage today, so I don't know if that was cyber-based or
Who did?
overload. Amazon, AWS
I hadn't even read the news yet today.
Yeah, there's something going on with S3.
Yeah.
But how about end user authentication? Where do you see that going? You know, we've moved to, you know, bigger passwords, multi-factor authentication, and maybe chips and credit cards, but it doesn't seem to be going that fast.
Well, talk about
biorhythms and what, you know, where does it go in the future?
Talk about a space that could be really enabling if we get our act together as with cybersecurity solutions, right? If you think about the day that you want to get onto your bank account and you're on your phone, so it'll do facial recognition, or you're on your PC and you decide to do a PIN. So there's multiple types depending on your venue, depending on your endpoint, and I think that's where we really need to be. ID and password is probably gone by the wayside. Even the two-factor authentication that we have implemented, that's even morphing, right? We used to have a two-factor authentication where we had an ID and password, and then we had a code on a token that would provide another authentication. Now we can just send a code to your cell phone, right? If we're going to use that kind of authentication. But I do see biometrics coming into play in a bigger way, right? But then we need to think about, so what are the threats around biometrics? I used to joke with people, you know, having like a ring of eyeballs. They will now be used to break into biometric systems and things like that. But I think that's a truly enabling space, but hard to change out an authentication system. Yeah, but and nothing is foolproof as fast as we. Well, if you think about it. You know, think about the denial of service. So if you've got a two-factor authentication and you do a denial of service, and you're going to fail open when you have really significant security controls in place, you're going to fail open, which gives the malicious actors an opportunity, right? And so we need to think through those things carefully when we put them in place. We have to think about the day when it's going to come down, and we're still going to do business, right? We're going to go back to ID and password, or we're going to fail open because we need to do business, and we're going to need to implement some measures to monitor, to implement alternative controls. But it's a good question. That's an exciting space, the whole authentication area.
So with the AWS problems today, like it's brought down a lot of other websites and that sort of thing. Do you think that it's bad for so many websites to depend on one service like that? And if so, like what would you do differently?
I think diversification is a good thing. I think that, and I don't know many firms that are working across providers. Another very hard thing to do. I mean, the utopia would be to have an environment where it doesn't matter where you are, whether the workload can go to AWS one day, can go to Azure another day, can go to Google another day. That would be the utopia, and you can shift. But I don't know that anybody's gotten there really successfully. But it does beg that question, right? You've got to really have a good recovery strategy, or just it's either systems recovery, disaster recovery, or it's business continuity. How do you operate when those things happen? But yeah, it's a risk. Yeah, and I think industries start to need to look at those concentrations, right? We're all in a rush to get to the cloud. But now once we're there, do we really know where we have concentration risk now that needs to be considered for not just our company, but our industry as a whole? Good question.
So how do mobile payment systems like Apple Pay or Google's equivalent help, or like what kind of issues do you have with your systems there? Do they help make it more secure, or is it harder securing credit cards?
They make it easy, and I will have to admit that's not really my area of expertise, mobile pay, but I think it does make it easier to the extent that you can eliminate data that can be used. You eliminate a credit card data, you eliminate the transmission of sensitive data that can be picked up and used, the better. That's all I have to say on that topic. I really don't.
On one of your slides, you had a statistic that communication skills was one of the most important attributes for security. And we have I assume, mostly a technical group. And how do you balance that versus the types of people that you believe you're going to really need in order to balance security?
Yeah, you need both, and sometimes you need to sacrifice one or the other. And I would say this: you need a couple of good communications people because they need to articulate the strategy, right? And for I know there's a lot of technical people in the room. It's a really hard skill set to be super technical, and then come up and talk with a management team at a level that they can understand. I've had many technical teams, and I've had to tell them, tell me in 5th grade language. Right? Tell me in 5th grade language what that means. But that helps me articulate it. Now I can, the executives are 5th grade language, right? we talk pretty plainly, but that's what, it's a skill that can be developed, but it's really good to have a couple of both, right? A couple of people that can translate the tech terms into business terms. And I would take 5 techies to 1 communication person any day, though, because we need people. We really need people that will just jump onto the technology and be excited about how to protect it. And then if there's one person who can translate that, that's good. Yeah, it's a good question.
Joseph Lauren, who's I guess the president of Fidelity Health Group, came here I guess last month at a North Carolina CEO forum,
Yep.
and was talking about the same kinds of issues that we were talking about, communication. One of the things that he had said was that it's not enough to be telling people this is what you're supposed to do. We have to actually change people's behavior.
Yeah.
And if we don't do that, then we're just basically wasting our breath.
Right.
So the question I wonder is, this is the problem that he's concerned with. In cybersecurity, I suspect we have the exact same problem.
Yes, yeah, he's got some unique issues. I was his information security officer when he was building that business, so I'm pretty familiar with some of his challenges. And the phishing exercises that I talked about, that's one example of ways that across the firm we promote awareness, right? We have everything from screensavers, right, that talk about little cybersecurity topics, to training sessions, required training sessions. And depending on where you are, you might have some additional trainings. We have talks like this. Our CISO, I think he did about 300 talks last year. I don't know how he did it, but a lot of them just internally. And a lot of them were with our boards, our executive teams, management teams. If you get them on board, then it's much easier for them to help promote security concepts throughout the organization. It has to be a culture, yeah.
And are you successful with that, do you think?
It's always in need of improvement. It's always in need of improvement because we always have new people coming in. We always have new products, services that are protected and developed in different ways. And I think we're somewhat successful. And like I said, I think every person has gone through some level of training that they can talk about some good things that we do, or talk about some things that they can't do because we've got a good program in place. But it's a constant effort. You can't let up. You can never let up on it. Good question. What else?
So I don't know if you have a view into the software developers at Fidelity, and you mentioned penetration testing, but I was just wondering if you had a view into, in many companies they put technology out and then they're going to get around to security someday. What kind of transitions have taken place within Fidelity?
Yeah, and that's where I talked about security being really integral to the business and the process, right? And the way that we differentiate in some of our systems development activities is to bake it in up front. Part of the testing cycle has to include security testing. The architecture has to include security elements, right? So right up front, they're considering how they're going to secure it. And then we do testing before things go into production, and then continued. We have a whole program just around systems development life cycle. We have a particular training that comes to mind for developers and what our standards are and how they can do it. And we've got a team that's really, really good in application security that can dive in too.
Thank you.
Yeah. That's a good question because it gets, once it's internet facing, all bets are off, right? Yeah. Yeah.
This is kind of in contrast to the earlier question. So as someone in Poole College of Management, we're not exposed to much code or any technical materials. So how would you suggest going about developing these technical skills outside of our courses per se?
Well, a couple of things. I think if you want to get the technical skills, you'd want to have some course materials, right? You can do that online. A Cloud Guru, for instance, I think that's an AWS training that's out there. It assumes that you know nothing, right? And that's one that I signed up for not too long ago, right? But you actually, it does assume you know a little bit, but you can then go and research the areas that you don't know. Those certifications that I talked about, if you're taking accounting courses, if you're taking audit courses, right? If you're taking business law in the regulatory environment, I remember the name of the book when I took it. They're going to probably start to have some security concepts built in, especially on the regulatory side. But look for those certifications that relate to security. It's not all technical. And you can take a look at the domains of security, and part of it's management, right? There are certifications that are information security management, and it's all around managing a program, and it's more at the business level because you're understanding the business risks. You have that translator or that translation capability to translate the technical issues into business terms, right? And financial decisions are going to be made for that. So there's an entire track that you can take that doesn't necessarily have to have you coding. I was never a coder. Couldn't code my way out of a paper bag. But there's hope there. I think in audit, there's IT audit too. I mean, if you've got some audit skill or you're taking audit courses, there's a whole track around IT audit that gets you exposed and gets you some experience so that you understand it. So you understand the domain without necessarily having to be, 6 levels deep. Yep. What else? Other questions? All right, well, this was fun. Really good questions. Thank you. Thanks very much.